Have you ever watched a show or movie and thought, what the hell was that about? Well, then grab some popcorn because we have just the podcast for you. Welcome back to Cheap Pop, where my friend Matt and I try to take a look at film, television, maybe video games. I don't know, really don't quote me on that. Break it down, flip it, and reverse it. All the while trying to give you our insights, analysis, and some interesting tidbits you might not know. I'm Derek, but I will not be your host today. That actually will be my friend here, Matt Carlin. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Derek. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm ready to talk about episode 17 here. It's another one where we've been trying to kind of sync up the schedule and get this rolling. So we've been it's been a little bit since the initial viewing, but I've gone back through the notes and I've watched at least part of the episode back again just to try and get it all top of mind. But yeah, this is interesting because we have the fourth child, or as it's also known, the fourth to be qualified. Whew.
I don't like hearing child anymore. I like children. I like it to be improperly used, and I think from this day forward, I will never say child again.
Okay, so you'll pick up your daughter and be like, "Hello, my children."
Hello, my children.
How are you, my children? She's like looking around like, what?
Well, why are you saying it?
Is there something I should know about? No.
Yeah, it's good. I actually started this episode in a car on a phone, and still
hopefully not while driving.
No, yeah, I was going about 80 on the interstate. It was great. No, I was in a parking lot somewhere.
Okay.
Anyways, so let's get started. So we start this episode, and Misato is standing in for Shinji in front of the council, and that is because Shinji is in an unstable mental state at this point after his last incident. As we all can probably recall, he's ripping his way out of this giant ball. He's kind of disoriented when everybody gets him out of the Ava. All we know right now is that shit's not going well. So it's a great start to the episode. We start talking about the angels trying to communicate with mankind, which we brushed on a little bit in the last episode. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts on the Avas questioning towards Shinji? I know we talked a little bit about that, but let's get into it a little further now that the council is asking these questions.
I think it's an interesting thing that they're finally kind of delving into, because this whole time we've been thinking like, well, there has to be more to it. This can't just be like random acts of like aggression from the angels. There has to be an actual ulterior motive. And so they're kind of questioning like, okay, well, maybe even though they've only ever attacked individually, we've never seen like collaboration or cooperation from them. They're all going towards the same thing. And so now they're kind of wondering like, why are they coming towards us? Is it that they're trying to understand us? Are they trying to interact with us in some way? And the kind of interesting question there is they're basically trying to figure out if angels are trying to understand the heart of man. And I don't really know the answer to that. I honestly don't think that would be the case, but I do understand why that would be a question. But yeah, this is just talking in front of the human instrumentality council at this point. And like you said, Misato's having to stand in for Shinji, who they want to question, but she's basically like, you're not talking to him. He's not stable right now. And I guess if you go through that direct C or whatever, yeah, I guess that's a valid condition after all of that. But it is interesting that as she's giving what feedback she can, she's answering their questions, they're almost musing amongst themselves like, oh, well, they've always acted independent of one another, at least until now. And then she tries to answer or ask kind of a follow-up to that. And they're like, basically like, shut up, woman. You're not here to ask questions.
Yeah, you're not authorized.
Yeah. And then she's basically...
She makes a statement too about if the Avas are sentient, do they understand human thought? Whereas the council's asking if they're interested in the human psyche, what the heart feels. So it's interesting to me that we get to this point in the show, and this seems like the first time those questions are getting asked.
Yeah.
So that makes me think how little the council actually knows about Avas. Mm-hmm. And I assume that's because Gendo's only giving them a small piece of the puzzle and he's keeping all that information for himself.
Yep.
But I think this really showcases how little they seem to know, even though we know that even though we don't have the answers, there's a lot more going on there.
Yeah, and Gendo is among them as well. He's never asking the questions, but when they dismiss Misato and the lights come up, Gendo is actually among them, which I thought was kind of interesting. That he would even be there, but almost like in secret, like he's wanting to like observe, but he's not even letting Misato know, at least as far as I understand it, that he's present. And he even kind of acknowledges that the angels are becoming increasingly difficult to contend with or predict. And that means that time could be running out to complete their plans. So all of this has the Sele in just a funk, essentially, because things are starting to happen that don't necessarily align with whatever the Dead Sea Scrolls say. And so they're almost a little bit flummoxed. They're almost feeling like an urgency of like, ooh, okay, well, we didn't anticipate something like this. And which makes you wonder, like with past events and things that have gone wrong, whether it was at different locations or whatever, like, oh, what did you expect? Or what did you know was going to happen versus what didn't happen? Like what happened in the last episode was serious shit, but compared to some of the losses we know they've suffered in the past, you're like, well, it seems like that one in the past should have been a bigger deal, but you don't really talk about it like it's as big of a deal. And so that's, like I said, we don't get to see what the Dead Sea Scrolls say. We just are told like certain things are expected or anticipated. Other things like this is almost like a new development. And anytime something that steps out of that neat little pattern for them emerges, they're very upset about it. They're stressed about it, essentially.
Yeah, it makes me wonder too, which I would think that this probably is not the case, although may be an interesting like tidbit for them to throw in there is if that's how the Ava pilots are selected by some, not necessarily like they're looking at a Dead Sea Scroll and it's, you know, oh, pick Shinji, pick Ashka, but more of like, it will be someone, you know, if they're predicting that these Ava pilots are somewhere in the Dead Sea Scrolls, maybe some life events that these children have gone through to like narrow down their selection in order to like find these pilots. Yeah. Now, my guess would be it's more for like the events that the angels cause, but just a thought of like, that would be an interesting thing if that was something that was pointed out by that.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if there is any kind of mention of that. I think, as I assume and kind of understand it, I think it makes mention of the number of children, and it's supposed to be like a destined sort of thing, again, in this prophecies type thing. But I don't think it lays out specifically like this child or a child with these experiences. I think it's more the Marduk Institute, and which we know is really just kind of Nerv itself, kind of just pinpointing and choosing who these kids are going to be. And it's always someone that they're able to kind of keep under their thumb, keep a watch and control over, and that, which this episode does get into exploring here rather soon.
Yeah. You also, you know, we still, I don't think, have gotten to the point where we understand why children. And I definitely think that influence might have something to do on that, as, you know,
the power dynamic. And
exactly. It's like you're a younger mind, you should be taught to listen to your elders. We're kind of in control. You're more, just like school, there's a dynamic of like, I'm the boss, you're the person doing the work.
We'll expand that too. Even Kaji talking about Misato in recent episodes, talking about how much she's grown up. He's saying that right at the time she's finally starting to question things and step out of kind of just towing the line and doing what she's told. Like, she's been reckless, but she's 29 years old and she has still largely just been like, oh, they'll tell me that if I need to know that, if I need that to do my job or something. And it's now that he's kind of almost remarking like, oh, wow, you've really grown up. It's like at that moment where she is kind of stepping into that full realized adult, essentially, and starting to question things, starting to actually use her own critical thinking and everything. So maybe that could just be my interpretation of it. I don't know if that's something that was planned or whatever, but I kind of see that parallel in there for sure.
No, I can see how that lines up. So we get into the next part here. There's a mention of Ray going to see Dr. Akagi tomorrow. Kinsuke is headed to I'm going to butcher this, New Yokosuka. Is that correct? And I believe that's where he's going to check out the new battleship. I assume that's like a parent that's doing that and he's tagging along.
Yeah.
And then we start talking about Unit 4. So there's a discussion brought up about Unit 4, the labs, facilities all vanished. And they're saying that this was mostly a result of the Dirac Sea, or at least that's the thought.
Yep.
And they start mentioning that there's an S2 drive that was repaired in Germany, and I guess that's when the attack happened. So we have to assume that whatever this S2 drive is, that's probably what brought the Angel to that site and caused that level of destruction. Now, we see a top-down bomb video is what it looks like.
It's not a bomb. The way I view it, I think it's a satellite feed essentially of that second branch, the German branch, essentially being swallowed up. It looks like a shockwave exploding out, but I think it's like the Angel before in the last episode kind of expanding out and just everything in it vanishes. And so the way I view it is just like the way that they were attacked last episode and didn't really have much of a counter for. I think the S2 drive, I honestly think that the S2 drive could have been infected by the Angels in a similar way to what we talked about when we had that nano supercomputer Angel within Nerv, how it was hacking stuff. Similar way where it's like almost like a infected piece of equipment was used, whether in the S2 drive or just in the facility, and they weren't able to stop it like the third branch, the Japan branch, was able to. And so using that same sort of thing as the last Angel from that episode, the Dirac Sea, it just kind of expands out and swallows up everything. And this is like countless thousands of people. This is Ava Unit 4. They said it's within an 89-kilometer radius disappeared. And yeah, that takes the S2 drive as well. And they're talking about like how many things could have gone wrong to do something. They're like, well, there are 32,000 plus possibilities. But Risuko seems to think it's her educated guess is that it's the same Dirac Sea that Unit 1 had been swallowed up by. And as a result, the potential for that S2 drive being gone is very high now.
Did we get a mention of what the location is where this S2 drive is being tested? I know that we mentioned a repair in Germany, but what is the actual site of Unit 4?
I think it's still in Germany. The consistency with this series, including in the Rebuild series, seems to suggest that there are 3 Nervs, essentially. There's the one in Japan, which this seems to call it Branch 3, which I would have assumed it would be Branch 1, but the United States is Branch 1. And Germany, that one is known as like Nerv Europe, basically, and that's where Asuka came from, by the way. So it's like her old stomping grounds, essentially, is the one that vanishes here. So I thought it was interesting. They didn't even throw it to her for a reaction to any of that, because that seems like that would be a pretty significant thing. Even if it was just like somewhere you knew of, even if you didn't have friends there, I feel like that would be like an emotionally impactful thing. Like if I moved out of a place and then a couple months later it was, blown up in some explosion, I would be like, whoa, holy crap. Like that would feel surreal, like I wasn't there long ago. That could have been part of that.
Yeah. Just like Rico and Starship Troopers.
Yeah, exactly.
So my guess off of this, which, we haven't gotten to it yet, but I feel like this may be a Nerv play.
Okay.
It might have been something that they, maybe they were worried about Unit 4, the operator, maybe they were worried about the facility, but I definitely get the sense that Gendo wants everything under his roof, which he ends up in this episode. We might be skipping ahead a little bit.
A little bit.
Not that much, but taking control of Unit 3. And I believe that was coming from the US. Is that correct?
Yeah. So one of the Avas in Germany was lost. The other Ava, Unit 3, belonged originally to the US, but now they're worried it might also be contaminated. Again, that theory I had of similar to the hacking computer one. They're worried it might be contaminated. So they're like, we don't want it, but we can't get rid of it. And so Gendo is basically just like, whatever, we'll take it. Someone has to take it, we'll take it. And now we need a new pilot because as they end up saying in a moment, the dummy plug is not yet ready. It can fool the Avas, but it's not yet ready to implement. So they can't just have Ray's dummy consciousness plugged in to do this. We did.
Yeah, which when they're making a comment on the dummy plug, I think this is the first time we've ever really gotten into what is involved there. And maybe we've talked about it a little bit before, but just quickly for anyone listening, we talk about this containing the personality of someone, but it does not contain the heart or soul because those things cannot be digitized. So essentially what this dummy plug is doing is it's tricking the Ava into thinking that there's a pilot inside, and it syncs with that dummy plug. But as we hear in the next line, there's definitely like a danger aspect to it. And my assumption is that's probably something like when they go in their berserk mode, it probably has gotten to the point where it's realized the dummy plug wasn't fully like synchronized with it. And then the Ava kind of goes out of control, which is my guess of what's been happening in the past. So I'll let you take it over again.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on something early on. We kind of skipped over a little bit. After the council interrogating Misato, we cut to a hospital where two nurses are talking about a grade school girl with difficult injuries, making steady progress. Her older brother is Tohji, who we know, and they say he's been making twice weekly visits. You also get a scene then with Gendo talking to Ray and actually seeming like he's genuinely kind of interested in his Gendo way. About school. He actually asks her about school, which again, look when Shinji tried to ask or talk to him about school in any way, but he actually goes as far as to like ask, like, is school going all right? How's school going? And she, typical Ray just gives like, oh, there are no problems there. And his usual acknowledgement is just like, I see. Very well then. But I thought it was interesting, just him actually reaching out and making an effort to that, trying to connect with her in some way, but almost not knowing how. And, she's still kind of reserved and pulled back, but you do see signs of mild interest on that front as well. And then you have at the school, the teacher telling Tohji that he needs to take the notes to Ray at the end of the day. So then, yeah. And then that's when we had all the stuff with the second branch and all of that we just talked about.
Yeah, and that's because he is on duty. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the way that schools there work is you rotate, like a different student might have a certain week where they have to like have those extra duties, whether it's, in this case, it looks like he's burning the trash, he's locking up the school, unlocking the school, all of that. You kind of just have these additional, almost like borderline custodial office manager type responsibilities.
Is that a typical thing in Japan, or is that more like focused on this facility and this?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's Japanese schools in general, but it very well might be with the culture and certain trends and things like that, traditional things. Very well could be.
So we get into, and a little bit before that, I know we start talking about the fourth children, and that there's one candidate that's prepared for the Corps right away. Then we get into Shinji and Asuka in this kind of funny moment where they get called lovebirds, and both of their faces turn bright pink, and just an absolutely hilarious scene. So I like that. Not much content to it, but it was funny to watch.
And then it's them acting like children and being embarrassed, but also kind of like the reason they're embarrassed is, I think, because there is a grain of truth in there. Like they are growing to dislike each other, but at the same time, they also kind of have that like odd, almost attraction to one another at the same time. So it's like, I don't like you, but I weirdly do kind of like, I'm interested in some way. Yeah. It's hard to say. I hate you, but I also kind of dig you.
So we get into the class rep talking to Shinji's friend, Suzahara, is that right?
Tohji Suzahara, yeah.
Tohji, yes. Okay. I wrote Suzahara the whole time, I don't know why.
That's the Japanese, they'll formally address you, unless you're on like a very informal basis, you'll address someone by their last name.
Okay. So the class rep is talking to him, and I believe she's asking about delivering those papers with him to Ray. And it's almost like he doesn't hear her, but she just gets denied in the most hilarious way, because she's like, I could go deliver the papers with you. Shinji, will you go with me?
Yeah, he's either oblivious or just totally disinterested. I think it's that he's oblivious, honestly.
He's oblivious for sure.
Yeah, I don't think it's that he knows she's into him. I think he's just like, he's not thinking of her necessarily in that way, not because he's like, oh, no, I'm not interested. I just don't think for whatever reason he's drawn in that same way to her. And so he's thinking of this as like, oh, it's just a class rep getting on my ass about something. Fine, I'll go over there. Well, I'm not going to go to a girl's house alone. Shinji. Like he's just getting back up for himself. He's not thinking at all in terms of like, oh, she's trying to set up almost like a sort of date or an errand at least together where we can spend time together away from school and like maybe see each other in a different light.
It's funny that he says like you should never go to a girl's house alone because, you know, when we first see him, he's kind of like always gawking at the ladies and stuff like that. But he seems very like conscious of not getting himself into trouble in that way. And I wonder if that's just from like past experience or what, but
I don't know.
Shinji and him go, they check out Ray's place, which is a pigsty that doesn't look like any girl lives there, which is kind of the same thing we got last time. And Shinji...
I want to double back real quick. We have a cool scene with Misato and Risuko here that I think is a pretty important one. So while everything at school is going on, we had, first of all, a scene with when Ray was still floating in the tube where Ritsuko was actually there with Gendo. Risuko was there with Gendo. And so that acknowledges like, okay, so she is fully aware of this. We would have suspected as much before, but now it's very clear. Gendo tells Ray as they're talking about like the candidates for the program and everything, why the dummy plug can't work for now. And I have this idea for who I want to select. Again, telling us she's also the one basically making that selection there. And Gendo then tells Ray, you can come out now. She opens her eyes, smiles, and he's like, let's go get something to eat, which again is just showing like a weird little connection there with him. I think he says like, let's share a meal or something, which is just showing their connection, and she's smiling. So there's some weird dynamic there. But I thought it was interesting first that Risuko's facial expression in the background, it's almost a very dark expression, almost like she's like disturbed, almost like I almost read this as like, you know, you're in really deep shit, but you can't do anything about it at this point. It's kind of just like you have to just go along to get along now. Like, there's no like, oh, it's not like I can just back out of this now. Like I don't morally or ethically agree with this at all, but whatever the hell is happening, I'm too far in to do anything else about it. So that was that. And then the scene with Misato and Risuko is first when Risuko's telling her about the arrival of the fourth child. Misato is like, I didn't see anything from the Marduk Institute. And Risuko says, it'll be arriving tomorrow with the child. So it's like the fact she's in that degree of know is again confirmation to Misato that you know stuff and you're keeping it from me intentionally. And worse, you're basically lying to my face by acting like you don't know anything more. So it's just pissing her off about it. And their dialogue with each other gets kind of very pointed and cold at this point. Misato asks her very formally, she says, Dr. Akagi, what else are you hiding? Like, or what else are you hiding? What are you hiding this time? That's it. Dr. Akagi, what are you hiding this time? Risuko just says nothing, just gives her a very flat one-word answer. And that just further pisses off Misato because it's just like, you know, it's showing that like their friendship at this point, it's out the window, like in terms of like, what I will loop you in on, what I will key you into. It's like, we're friends to an extent, but in something like this, there's a hard line and I'm not keeping you anything more in the awareness of it. So as they're talking about the pilot of the fourth child, they're the new pilot of, it's weird. It's the fourth child, but it's Ava Unit 3 they would be piloting, just like Asuka is Unit 2. But she actually is considered the second child. Anyway, I digress. Misato says, Asuka's pride is what drives her to be an Ava pilot. Rei is an exception as well, but for everyone else, nothing good can come from being an Ava pilot and being associated with us. Shinji knows that better than anyone. Basically, to that, Risuko is just like, yeah, what can you do? You gotta do what you gotta do to survive, you know? And Misato is just like, you know, stop moralizing, stop trying to justify this. And their just cold interaction kind of comes to an end. But Misato now also knows Tohji is going to be this fourth child, and she's
pretty taken aback by that too.
Stunned, and also because she knows Tohji a little bit. He's been around enough now. And also very concerned with how that's going to impact Shinji, and how are you going to justify to Shinji this, that now another person he cares about is going to have to get pulled into this. Very, very complicated. And I thought it was interesting as well that it's like Ava or Asuka is different because she's just so driven to be the best. She almost doesn't consider what she has to sacrifice to be the best. Seems to be like what I took from her saying what she said. Rey is also an exception, but for anyone else, I'm like, anyone else? There's literally just Shinji right now. What do you mean anyone else? For Shinji, though, there's nothing to be gained from being associated with the Avas or us. And now we're going to be pulling someone else in. That's another person that he cares a lot about. So it's very interesting there. So flash back to where you were on that.
Yeah, so Shinji cleans up Rey's place, yes. And Rey has a line which says, she's talking about Shinji saying thank you. And she says, thank you, words of gratitude, man's first words I've never spoken to him. Which at this point, I believe she's talking about Gendo and not talking about Shinji.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's a broader application there. I don't think it's a literal direct to Shinji.
Which seemed like such a weird statement because we see this like companionship between them, this very awkward, we've already got an idea of what's going on, we just haven't solidified it. But in that sentence she speaks, it almost sounds like she's a prisoner in a way. At least that's what I took out of it. Like, I don't know, like she feels trapped to this man, even though there's like seems to be such a like love and admiration there. This is the first time I've gotten a weird feeling about Rey towards Gendo, and I'm not sure what it is exactly.
Yeah.
What were your feelings on this?
I think to some extent she's not looking at them as like interchangeably, but I think she's looking at them as very much alike. And so it's to some extent, it's almost like that line blurs when Gendo is more authentic with her and he actually opens up a little bit. I think she sees a similar kindness and gets a similar feeling from the interactions with him, because it's the only two people she's ever opened up around and expressed any concern for or even affection for to some extent. So yeah. I think it's almost like that line blurring a little bit. And ultimately, I think Gendo, we see more of him around her. And so I think that is why she has that thought, like you said, kind of applying that like to Gendo, even though she's saying it to Shinji. Maybe she's thinking about it like parallel thinking, but even still, I think it's that sort of thing where she sees them in a similar light and she's thinking about like what we were watching before as far as that gratitude for everything he's doing. Because maybe she does feel more complete with whatever the hell's going on in the test tubes that she floats in. And so she views it as like him making her more complete or giving her some new, for lack of a better term, lease on life.
That's an interesting take on it.
Yeah.
So we get into the next scene and we start talking about Eden and Paradise. So they are talking, it's Gendo and then help me on the other guy's name, Kozu.
Gendo's right-hand man.
Yeah.
Again, that's his surname. If you just go on, that's his first name. A lot of times you just hear him referenced as Futsuki.
Futsuki?
Yeah, Futsuki. But yes, Gendo, Akari, and Futsuki.
Yeah, so we talk about the city being man's artificial paradise on Earth. And Gendo makes a statement that man was driven from Eden, forced to flee into a world where death could come at any moment. And the response to that is that the quest to insulate from the fear of death and satisfy carnal desires, mankind has built a paradise for itself. Yep. Which I like where we're going here. And then Gendo makes a mention of an armed city being a refuge for cowards who run away from their enemies, which that statement felt like Adam being driven from Eden was the first act of war from God. And almost like he is taken on with this holy war and he's like continuing Adam's pursuit to like not necessarily get back into grace or heaven, but like more of like a, you're wrong, we're right, we'll make our own paradise, we don't need you. Which
I think that's a good encapsulation of how, certainly the presentation of Gendo thus far, for sure.
Yeah. So I think this really like gives us a lot more to like his motivations.
Yeah, for sure. And the way I read this scene as well, and there's been a couple other scenes where I've had a similar thought. I don't know that Futsuki, even though he's like Gendo's right-hand man, I don't know that he actually like shares the same vision entirely. Like there are times where like this, they're kind of like talking about, oh, the city is like this marvel and it's almost like an accomplishment of mankind. And Gendo's like, oh, it's a refuge for cowards and blah, blah, blah. Like they seem to have a very different perception on like the achievements of man versus what's actually a failure of man or a weakness. Like the same thing with the Antarctic when they went to the location of the second impact. Futsuki was talking about it like it was this barren wasteland and it was this really terrible place. And meanwhile, Gendo's like, oh, it's a land cleansed of original sin. And it's just like, I don't know that you two necessarily see eye to eye on like how you perceive this. And so it's interesting that you work together. And greater scheme, I know why. I'm just saying thus far, it's not clear. You're like, what, why? But this is confusing. Yeah. It seems almost like you have opposing views and yet you're working together on something huge.
Yeah, we're having the same conversation, but we're not getting the same thing out of it.
Yeah. And in this conversation as well, Gendo, he doesn't plan to lie to the council about the loss of the second branch or of Unit 4, which are losses that Futsuki actually calls, he actually says that they were much to bear. And Gendo's like, it really doesn't matter even if the S2 drive was lost. I don't ever know what the S2 drive is, by the way. It's just a thing that's mentioned as, I think about it, and I'm not saying it's the same thing. I think about it in similar terms as like the dummy plug, like a technology that other branch was developing that was supposed to do something. But you don't ever see that in action, the S2 drive, I don't think, unless I'm mistaken and it's going to come up again and I'll be like, oops, my bad.
Well, he mentions the data being backed up.
And that's why he said it doesn't matter. Even if the unit was lost, the data would have been backed up in Germany. So it's almost immaterial that it's lost. But he says, as long as Unit 1 and Tokyo 3 are safe, there's nothing to fear. So again, we've known for a while that he puts over everything the importance of Unit 1. And now he's actually looping in Tokyo 3, which I guess makes sense just because Nerv is under that. But whatever Gendo is doing and planning has everything to do with that one particular Eva and the city itself. So that's interesting. It's just further insight into understanding his motive and pieces of what he's planning or at least attempting.
And that's even more of why I think Unit 4's disappearance along with the facilities was a calculated move by him. I think that he is so worried about this protection of Tokyo 3 and Unit 1 that he thought to himself, okay, well, I'm playing chess, so I sacrifice this pawn and then I'm going to get, Unit 3, and then I've got one more backup. Now, does that cost me an Ava? Yes. But does that cost me an Ava that's realistically going to be able to like...
Think about it in this way too. There are times in the series where anytime an Ava is damaged, they'll talk about like having to get new parts. And sometimes those parts come from other Avas. That could be like replacing an arm. That could be actual equipment. It could be whatever, but it's spare parts, if nothing else, that he also has access to now just by having another Ava. It doesn't even matter the perception of like having another pilot. It's just having the other unit at your disposal now. So that could also be a chess move in itself as well, because you've made the only other people who would be in competition with you. One of them you erased off the map right as they got it, essentially. And the other one is now is scared of it as if it's corrupted or that it's, contaminated and now it's a risk of an angel attack or something. So you've basically made it where it's completely undesirable. The other sides are either gone or don't want to think about it. And now you have it to do who the hell knows what.
Yeah, I think Gendo's always got to play it, that's for sure.
Yep.
So we get into the 7th construction phase coming to an end. saying that the city is finally complete. And then Gendo mentions not being worried about the losses. We talked about Tokyo 3.
And the Dead Sea Scrolls come up in here.
The Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yep.
Yeah, this is when they talk about incidents that were not predicted. And then he says these old men needed a lesson, which you talked about a little bit earlier.
Yeah, the council is just unsettled because what happened with the Branch 2 getting swallowed up was not foretold in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they are very much like almost fundamentalist in their view of following the Dead Sea Scrolls. If something bad happens, but it was foretold, they're like, well, it was destined. It was what was supposed to happen. But now that something major has happened that wasn't foretold, they're kind of freaking out and they're trying to figure out almost, I don't know if it's revising their plan or if it's almost like bending over backwards to make the logic work where like they still can come out in the end with what they ultimately want. But Gendo, he's just like, look, it wasn't planned, but it doesn't change what we're ultimately still working toward. So those old men who are looking at it in such a closed-minded way, they needed a lesson that even the Dead Sea Scrolls is not absolute.
So we get into the next thing here, which I believe it's Kaji talking with the younger coworker and doing his normal Kaji thing, trying to get on to everything that moves and breathes. And Misato interrupts this little exchange. And once the younger coworker kind of leaves the area, she asks about the Marduk Institute. And then I believe she also brings up Adam, also saying that the timing for the fourth children was a little bit too
convenient.
Perfect.
Yeah. And he gets real close and basically he looks like he's like hunching over her as if like his body language from afar would look like he's doing his womanizing thing, but he's actually like very serious in like how he's talking to her, essentially saying the Marduk Institute doesn't exist. Nerv is pulling all of the strings. And then he tells her to look up code 707, which Misato quickly realizes, wait, that's Shinji's school. So did you get the kind of implication from this?
So, I mean, I might not be thinking what you're thinking, but I've kind of been thinking about this since the beginning of the series of this school, this class. We've already got 2 pilots to start, then we bring in a 3rd pilot to the same class. My assumption is this class is all of the future Ava pilots that can be put into use whenever they either have an Ava available or if they need a backup. Those are their most likely candidates, whether they know it or not. And then finally, when we get the 4th pilot, this is really the first time we get to see that in action.
Yeah.
So
essentially, that's and I don't know that there's an absolute confirmation of it, but that seems to be the general consensus is all of the students at Shinji's school, not knowingly, the students don't know it, are potential pilots and all of their families are connected in some way to Nerv. If you've ever heard Tohji or Kensuke talk about their families, there's always some loose connection to Nerv in there. And so I think they're just potential pilots and they can be selected at this point. I'm not saying Toji's parents are like, yeah, no, we're totally for that or whatever. I think it's just as simple as they're eligible for it if they're there. And it's almost like a luck or misluck of the draw. So Tohji is going to be the new one selected for this. And it's kind of just like exposing like why we've said like the education in this sense almost doesn't matter that much. Like, how do you keep Shinji and Asuka that focused and engaged with the idea of like school when they're having to like literally fight for the existence of humanity on any given day? It's like, I don't know, man, this math problem doesn't seem that important when I'm dealing with this other shit after school today, or sometimes during school, I just get called at random times, I think it's just kind of like the sort of front just to kind of keep them accessible, keep them loosely like in the way. It's almost like indoctrination because they'll talk about the second impact and everything that happened. And everything they're talking about seems to be more pro Nerv, or at least that sort of resistance against the angels. Like it seems like the vast majority of stuff is geared towards that. That's maybe more my projection of it, but that's the impression I got.
Yeah.
Which is actually an interesting twist that just, I don't think it's as much room to breathe as I maybe would like, but I do love that idea.
And as much as I feel like the class is not a necessary part of their lives, I do feel within a certain degree that it kind of is, depending on what they're teaching, because with every AVA, we get brought a very complex problem.
Yeah.
None of them are the same. Each of them need to be addressed totally differently. So we don't really get to see a ton about what's happening in school. I think we get one interaction with a professor talking about the second impact. Yeah. But I would like to know like really what they're studying, because if you started getting into like battle logistics, something like that, whether it's, you know, whatever application they're talking about at school, there definitely could be things that are helping them kind of formulate a strategy to defeat the angels. But we never really have seen that to this point.
Nah, and unfortunately, you're not really going to. That's like I said, one of those things where I love that the implication is there. I don't feel like they give it as much room to breathe as it probably needed. But yeah, they definitely make sure to drop the breadcrumb where you're like, oh, well, what if they're doing this? We're not going to see it, but I guess we can imagine that's what they would be doing. So then Kaji is telling Shinji to come have tea with him and proceeds to show him basically his hobby garden. And he's talking about making and growing things and finding happiness. And it's sort of a metaphor, but he's just showing him this like watermelon patch he's essentially been growing out there on a hillside. And his dialogue here, I went ahead and grabbed the quote because it's kind of the first person in a way telling Shinji like it's okay, essentially, that he's struggling in some ways. He says, look, knowing about hurtful things only makes a person more caring, and caring is not the same thing as being weak. So like Shinji, I think, has really had this struggle with feeling that because he cares and because he's to an extent more sensitive to things, which again, given what he faces, who the hell wouldn't be? But I think he's insecure about that because everyone around him is either numb to it, indifferent, or combative about it, like coping to the opposite extreme side of the spectrum, where he feels like his reaction is wrong. And it's almost like he himself, something must be wrong with him if he's like that. And I think Kaji is actually trying to tell him, no, it's not that. Like, it's not the same thing as being weak. It's just you care. Like it's different, and knowing about these hurtful experiences doesn't make you weak if you're hurt by them. So an interesting little conversation there. It's more sort of a waxing lyrical thing, but Kaji, there's more depth to his character than, and again, it's another character that I feel like you could have almost retold this story with him at the center, just like his investigation into stuff. You could have done almost like a mini series of sorts doing that. And I think there's enough meat on the bone to do something interesting with that. Never happens, but would have been interesting, because every time he pops up, it seems like there's something plot progressing, some kind of secret being uncovered, or he's giving some kind of genuine caring advice that seems like it's outside of the realm of what people expect from him, which is why, again, I think the womanizing thing is almost like the self he projects to the world so they don't look at him more seriously. It's almost like he knows it's cringe, and he's like, people just turn away, because even if it's not them that it's happening to, they're like, gross. Like, he's trying to do something. So it's like they turn away, and then he like has that moment to, whether he's like still looking into something or he needs to tell something serious to someone. It's like he's given himself that air of privacy.
Mm-hmm. That's a good take on it. So we get into Tohji being the fourth pilot, which I think at this point we've already kind of,
and Shinji knows. Yeah, Shinji knows as well when they were at school. No, has that happened yet? Is that the scene you're going into?
No. Kinsuke starts discussing.
Yes.
Pretty much, Kinsuke gives Shinji an entire, just huge monologue about everything that's been happening so far in the
Shinji
episode.
Knows nothing.
And Shinji knows nothing. So Shinji is now up to par. He's on with everybody else. This is kind of like, I mean, I guess Shinji's not always in the know, but he definitely felt like pretty disconnected from everything happening this episode. So it's like, last week on... So we get that. We go through some of the on-duty task, which I think this is, burning the trash. Mm-hmm. And then the class rep is talking again and
I'll make you a sandwich.
Yes, offers to cook. Yeah. Because she's always got extra food, even though that's not really the case. She's just trying to put a sweet gesture. But that was a cute moment. That was very cute.
He's still so dense to it. He's like, he still doesn't food, get it. That's a waste. I'll tell you what, I'll do you a favor. I'll eat it. He's not even flirting. He's just like, yeah, whatever. I'll take it off your hands. No sense wasting it. It's just like, damn it, dude. If you just looked like she's into you, like just look, you're clearly crazy about always drooling over Misato and stuff. You've drooled over Rei and Asuka before Asuka annoyed the hell out of you so much you decided you hated her too. So it's just like, just look, dude. Like for once, somebody is actually into you and like not reciprocating, but they're actually giving you the attention you've tried to direct at others. But he just doesn't get it. And he's just oblivious.
I feel like this is a very common trait with a lot of men too, where they'll, some girl will be hitting on them and, we're so used to that not being the norm that when it's happening, you're like, that didn't happen. What are you talking about? Like that girl was just talking to me. And everyone's also like, no, they were pretty obviously going for you there.
Yeah.
But he'll figure it out, hopefully, in time. Mm-hmm. And then we get Asuka prepping to talk to Kaji, which has this just hilarious face where she like takes this really deep, like concerned breath and then just puts on the act and immediately goes in. So
she's psyching herself up, trying to basically throw herself at him like, oh, you're going to look at me like I'm an adult kind of thing. Like she's laying it on thick, just trying to get on his radar. Cause in her mind, I've got to up the ante if I'm going to compete with Misato. And he's not interested. He's like in the middle of literally like reading confidential reports and stuff. She's like draping over his shoulders. And then she sees the screen as well, confirming that Tohji is the pilot of Unit 4. So he is the fourth children. And she's in disbelief. She's like, what? No way. Like, not him. No way. Not like oh, no, not him. Like literally can't believe he of all people would be qualified to do that. It's interesting. And again, showing that the school is kind of involved in this mix. Tohji earlier in the episode, while they're at school, is called into the principal's office. He's gone for a while. Shinji keeps kind of concerned. He knows that they're looking for a fourth child. He doesn't know who it is. And now, because Toji's been gone a while, he's kind of starting to maybe infer. And then by the time Tohji comes back, I think class is already dismissed. So Shinji didn't even get a chance to talk with him. He had to leave with Kinsuke. And so that just leaves Tohji to do those duties on his own. There was also a little part with a sync rate test for Shinji that I thought was important to mention. Before we showed the school, we had, when Shinji was at the watermelon patch with Kaji, Misato calls Kaji, because I guess she knows that Shinji's with him, and says that Shinji needs a report for a sync rate test. At that test, Shinji is now testing lower than he was when he had that swell of confidence. He's now testing lower since his disappearance in that direct C. And Misato is fearful. They think, it's probably because of his impact in that being taken into that direct C. And now she fears what him discovering about Tohji's recruitment will do to him as well. Because again, the sync rate, your focus, your acceptance and balance, your almost harmonization is crucial. And it's really about your psychological well-being, which is why I'm like, for how important this is, Nerv sure does a terrible job taking care of these kids' well-being, like mental health and everything. That's pretty significant. If they're like all hurrah last episode for a minute, when things were trending in the right direction, like, yes, all right, Shinji is the best one. He is getting so good at this. Like, this is great. This kid's born for this. And now all of a sudden he's starting to drop lower and lower in his sync rate. And they know there's shit that's going to hit the fan very soon, any moment, in fact. And that's probably going to mess with him mentally too. It's like, I would not be able to handle not just living in this kind of world in general, but being in that Nerv sort of command center thing, like just the stress of that, like the eggshells you would feel like you're walking on of like, oh my God, the world is on the line at any given moment. Our pilot is having a mental collapse here. His sync rates are getting worse. Our pets' heads are falling off. Like, there's nothing.
Cats and dogs living together.
There's nothing going right. It would just be too stressful. But yeah, this is pretty good. The episode pretty much wraps up.
Do you want to talk about the final little scene here? Are you talking about the bomber and the delivery?
Yeah, but you go ahead and get it.
So we see this bomber flying, and really the only thing I wanted to talk about here is we see Ava Unit 3, which we were already expecting. Mm-hmm. But if you notice, Ava Unit 3 is on a pinkish, reddish cross, just like we saw Adam on. So we can either be under the assumption that this is a delivery system for the Avas during transport, and that's what they use to put Adam on, or this is Adam's cross, which means what's happening with Adam right now? Where is he? Why is he off the cross? Why was this used for transport? It's just bringing up a lot more questions for me that I don't know what's happening yet. And this could be a small nothingness, or this could be something that's going to lead to something bigger.
Ava is a masterclass of leaving you hanging at the end, where you're like, okay, this is wrapping up nicely. Okay, yeah, Tohji's the fourth children or whatever. That's pretty significant. I wonder what'll follow up. The hell is that? What the hell is that? Like, it just immediately like gets you like hooked. Like you said, just that little visual where now you all of a sudden you're asking 10, 12 more questions, whatever, just trying to understand, like, where are we headed? What does this mean? All very interesting stuff. And I'm trying to think here. Again, I always got to be careful with these. I'm trying to think just off the top of my head what Ava Unit 3 looks like. I don't know off the top of my head. So yeah, it's getting very interesting. Oh, wait, no, I remember now. But it's getting very interesting.
I feel like that could be our alter ego podcast name. Very interesting, because I notice how much we say that. Yeah. I'm like, I'm not going to stop. That's just going to be part of this.
Yeah, pretty much. It's very interesting. It's almost like a very underwhelming catchphrase. Yeah. Things are picking up. We're going into episode 18 now, which, just doing the math, means we're down to like the last, 8 episodes, 9 if you count watching the episode itself. So yeah, we're hitting the sprint, and shit's gonna ratchet up real fucking fast. And we've already been ratcheting up, and you might think like, I feel like this episode was a little slower, but I feel like we've been moving at a pretty good clip now. Nah. It's
for how slow we started, it feels like we're 60 miles an hour now. But the fact that you're saying it's going to get crazier, my hands already cramping up.
It's going to get crazy. It's going to get confusing. It's going to get very, again, we were just talking about like 10, 12 questions just from seeing a single visual. You'll have more. You'll have moments where you're like, I don't know what this is, but I'm immediately filled with questions. Then the last couple episodes will roll around, and you'll be like, I have more questions and I have less understanding. And then we're going to watch End of Evangelion, and then you're just going to be like, what did I watch? I don't even know, but that's amazing. It's the most surreal piece of art I've ever watched, film, anything like that. And if I'm watching it, I don't ever like, it's not something that like I'll turn on for a little bit and then just like, all right, I'm done, turn it off or whatever. Or like, oh, I only really care about seeing to this part. If I'm watching it, I'm watching the entire thing, and I'm not on my phone. My eyes are glued to the screen just because it's so just awe-inspiring and surreal and just insane. It's like, again, there's overlap with the actual last couple episodes of where you can say like, okay, these would fit in here within End of Evangelion. But it's just awe-inspiring. That's the best way I know to put it. It's one of those things where you watch it, and it's, at the very least, you'll never forget that movie because the visuals are just so insane.
I can't wait.
And it's one of those things too. They try to sort of recreate a little bit in the Rebuild series eventually, and it's still crazy, but I don't think anything touches the original of it. It's moi, chef's kiss. But yeah, so we'll figure that out. Again, we'll make sure that we're watching that real time, same place, same setting, you and I watching that movie together, because it might take a couple of viewings to actually like grasp everything and be able to really talk about it. But at the very least, we got to try and record at least audio of our live reactions to shit happening, because it's that surreal. It's almost like you watch it once, not bothering to take the notes, just taking it in. And then the second time through is where you're like, okay, well, let me start trying to take these notes, because you don't want to miss anything.
Yeah.
Aerosmith, you don't want to miss a thing.
Don't want to miss a thing.
Oh, man. Well, we've been rambling for a while, but episode 17, it's a good one. I like it.
Yeah.
Again, raising questions, raising the stakes, and now you're wondering how all this shit's going to go down. And you're not going to have to wait long for some answers. Shit is going to go down.
Okay.
But to you viewers, I ask, did you learn a little bit today? Did you laugh, maybe cry? If so, consider leaving us a review or subscribing to Cheap Pop on YouTube. If not, then just skip that part. We don't need that negativity in our lives. But in general, that does it for today. You may think our take's cheap, but to you, we say, whatever, man, get your own podcast, douche. That was a little harsh at the end.
No, I like it.
a little bit harsh. I said it. I was just like, oh, I'm angry today. Why? Yeah, we'll be back next week and talking episode 18.